Bienvenido a mi diario de Inglés Británico, un podcast para hispanohablantes que quieren entender inglés británico con confianza y progresar profesionalmente en el Reino Unido. Soy Shandon, coach nativo de inglés británico. Y sí, también hablo español. En cada episodio hablo en inglés británico real y conversacional, para que practiques tu comprensión auditiva y te acostumbres a cómo hablamos los nativos en la vida diaria. En el episodio anterior hablé de algunos idiomas comunes que he aprendido, pero también hay otros que no son tan comunes y que quizá te sorprendan. De eso voy a hablar en este episodio. Te recomiendo que escuches este episodio más de una vez. No te preocupes si no entiendes todo. Cada vez que escuches vas a entender más. Vale, empecemos. Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the podcast. Are you ready to improve your English listening with me today? Let's get started. As you may know, I love languages. I've loved languages for a long time. As you know from the introduction, or if you've listened to me for a while, or if you've spoken to me personally, I'm fluent in Spanish. In the last episode, I spoke about 4 languages that I've learned, apart from Spanish. I spoke about French, Italian, German, and Portuguese. All languages that I've learned at some point in my life. These are quite popular languages to learn in the UK. But there are also 4 other, less common languages that I've learned. And these languages might surprise you. So today, I'm going to speak about those languages. For each one, I'm going to tell you why I decided to learn it, how I learned it, and the level I'm at now with the language. So let's go. I'm going to start with one of the most surprising languages that I've learned, that you might not expect. Russian. I spent 2 years learning Russian at school, in secondary school. Why, you ask? It just seemed different. It seemed like it would be an interesting, cool challenge. And as I've said many times, I love languages. So I thought, why not? Let's try it. And I loved it. I absolutely loved my experience learning Russian. For the 2 years that I studied it, Russian was my favorite subject. So I just studied it from the age of 14 to 16. And in that time, it was my favorite subject, even more than Spanish. Why was this? Mainly because my teacher was amazing. My teacher was called Mr. Alright, and he was an incredible teacher. The best teacher I've had in my life. He was very engaging and made all of our lessons so interesting. He didn't rely on technology, but still using books, using recordings, he made the lessons so interesting with lots of interesting conversation and making us use the language from the very start. I never traveled to Russia while I was learning Russian, which is a shame. And I haven't traveled to Russia since. In fact, I've never been to Russia in my life. So now, I hardly remember anything. I hardly remember any Russian at all. I can say some basic things like hello, здравствуйте, my name is Shandon, меня зовут Shandon, and some other basic phrases, but that's about it. It's a shame, but you forget languages if you don't spend time speaking them, so it makes a lot of sense. The second language I want to speak about today is another language that is spoken in Spain apart from Spanish, and this language is Catalan. I loved Spanish and learning languages. course, I started learning Spanish when I was 13 and I decided to study it at university. And then in the second year of uni, I had the opportunity to study Catalan as part of my degree. And so I snapped up the opportunity. Learning Catalan, I thought would be really easy. I thought it's going to be really similar to Spanish. And since I already had quite a good level of Spanish, I thought it would be easy. But it was far from it. The experience was very challenging. Of course, Catalan has lots of similarities to Spanish, but it's also a very different language. In fact, it's more similar to French, I would say. Luckily, as I mentioned in the last episode, I've spent a fair amount of time learning French. So that helped with my Catalan learning, but it was still very challenging. As part of my year abroad, the year of my university degree that I spent living abroad, I lived and worked in Barcelona. So I was there for 4 months. And while I was there, I worked in an office where only Catalan was spoken. In the office, nobody spoke Spanish. They all knew how to speak Spanish and were able to, but in the office, nobody spoke Spanish. They only spoke Catalan. And while I was there, I spent time translating things like texts and websites from Catalan to English. This helped me improve so much. Of course, I was working with people who would only speak to me in Catalan, so I had to improve. And I was working translating Catalan to English all day. It's so good if you can travel to a country where the language you're learning is spoken. It's by far one of the best ways to learn. And so that's why it's such a good thing if you're learning English to live in or travel to English-speaking countries. Because the more time you spend surrounded by the language, the more you'll learn and the more quickly you'll learn. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to continue learning Catalan in my final year of uni when I returned from my year abroad because there were some problems with my timetable. I was extremely unhappy about this because I really wanted to continue learning Catalan. And because I'd spent 4 months living in Barcelona, this would have been very easy for me. But I then stopped learning Catalan, and now I don't speak much Catalan at all. Okay, the third language I want to speak about today that I've learned in my life is Arabic. It's not common at all for people in England or the UK to learn Arabic compared to other languages like French, Spanish, or Italian. I actually wanted to study Arabic at university. I wanted to study economics, Spanish, and Arabic. But I wasn't able to study all 3 of those subjects. So I just studied economics and Spanish. Arabic, of course, is spoken in the Middle East and in North Africa. And it's very, very different from any other language I've learned in my life. It has a different alphabet and very, very different pronunciation. So why did I want to learn Arabic? I don't really know why, but it's always interested me. I love how it sounds, and I thought it would be amazing to learn this language. Also, my best friend from school speaks Arabic, so that was an added motivation. It's so different from the other languages that I've learned and was a completely different challenge. How did I go about learning Arabic? How did I learn Arabic? I studied online using a website called Pimsleur. I spent about 6 weeks learning, and I actually really enjoyed the experience because I got the opportunity to speak quite a lot and practice my pronunciation. After 6 weeks of learning Arabic, I then went to Jordan, the country in the Middle East, for my friend's wedding. I only spent 5 days there, but this was a great chance to practice the Arabic that I had learned. Of course, I wasn't having really long conversations and I didn't speak that much, but I spoke a bit and was able to order food. This was very satisfying and gratifying for me to be able to use the language that I'd only started learning 6 weeks before. Now, unfortunately, I've forgotten pretty much everything that I learned, except some very basic food and drink words, because of course, when you travel, food and drink and eating and drinking are a very great part of the experience. So I've remembered some of those words. Okay, the final language I'm going to speak about today will probably be really surprising. And that language that I've learned is Latin. Yes, I'm sure you're confused because Latin isn't a language that is spoken nowadays. Nobody speaks Latin now. So why did I study Latin if it's not spoken anymore? I didn't have a choice. I had to study Latin in the first 2 years of secondary school. It's quite strange studying a language that's not spoken because, of course, you can't then use what you learn in real life. So it seems pointless. But I've been told that learning Latin can be really useful for learning other Romance languages, such as Spanish and French. It was an interesting experience for me, but I don't remember anything except for some very basic sentences that we had to memorize and from the stories that we use to practice. Of course, nowadays I don't speak any Latin because nobody speaks Latin, so there's nobody to speak the language with. Okay, this brings me to the end of this episode, speaking about 4 less common languages that I've learned in my life so far. If you haven't listened to the last episode about languages, I really recommend that you listen. If you enjoyed this episode, please give this podcast 5 stars on the app that you're listening to. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Gracias por escuchar este episodio de mi diario de Inglés Británico. Ya has dedicado tiempo a tu aprendizaje hoy, y eso suma más de lo que crees. Poco a poco, tu inglés va a mejorar. Si vives en el Reino Unido y sientes que tu inglés te está frenando profesionalmente, te invito a hacer una evaluación de fluidez profesional gratuita conmigo. En esta sesión, analizo cómo hablas inglés hoy, identifico exactamente qué te está bloqueando y te explico qué necesitas trabajar para hablar con más claridad y confianza. No es una clase, es un diagnóstico claro y honesto de tu inglés hablado. Escríbeme por mensaje en Instagram para reservar tu evaluación. Dejo el enlace a mi cuenta en la descripción del episodio. Gracias y nos vemos pronto. Bye.